And as you see, we've just begun recording. So we'll go ahead and jump into the content. Looks like our PowerPoint is up. We just have to go into presentation mode. And real quick, while we're doing that, we do have an evaluation for this webinar. It's really helpful if you could complete that after you view our content for us. And we'll go ahead and drop that in the chat box for you. So thank you everybody for attending our first consultation call this year with Mhttc. Advanced topics in strengthening youth and young adult peer support is going to be our overall theme for all of our consult calls. But today we're talking about clarifying the youth peer support role. Next slide, please. Looks like we're having some minor technical difficulties. So real quick, we just want to review with you, for those who may not be familiar, the purpose of the Mhttc network. We are in region 10. You can see a map of all of the regions here, and we have that wonderful little brown corner up at the top. So we serve Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska, that are hoping that our content can go forth and be used in other states as well. These are the co-directors of the Mhttc in Region 10. They are Christina Clayton and Lydia Chiwais. I can't pronounce her last name, Lydia, but again, proudly serving Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. So the goal of Mhttc is to easily and freely disseminate information via technology for people to improve mental health and school-based services. And we are really proud to be one of their partners in spreading information about evidence-based practices, specifically related to peer support. There are a number of ways that you can connect with the Mhttc. This includes online courses, research and practice briefs. They have a newsletter that goes out that announces any sort of new products or trainings that are going to be offered. They also offer live trainings, and we always archive our webinars for you to access later. Always a good reminder, Mhttc supports strength-based, person-first and inclusive language. We are always open to feedback. If there's something that we say on one of our webinars that you find to be insulting, or maybe we just need a little bit of learning, please let us know. Also, please note that if we find that somebody is using such language on a webinar or a call like this, we will offer some coaching in order to correct that. So just something to be aware of. So now we'll go ahead and introduce our fabulous team. We decided that it would be best to have all of our pets in our introductions as well, because since we're all working from home, they sometimes make cameos. So I'm Caitlin Baird, and that is my dog Polo and my cat Jude sitting on my big comfy yellow chair. I am a program manager and trainer with the Pathways Research and Training Institute, focusing on trainings and implementation of interventions that help really bring youth voice to the table and that support youth support specialists in their role. Prior to coming to Pathways, I was a youth peer support specialist myself, working with youth and young adults in wraparound. And I was also a supervisor for youth peer support specialists who are serving youth in wraparound, youth and community-based services, and youth in drop-in centers. So I'm really pleased to be here today in order to use some of my personal and professional experience to really help you with folks who are in this role. And now I will hand it over to my colleague, Maria.
Hi everyone, I'm Maria Hermson-Kritz, and I am also a trainer and research assistant at Pathways with Caitlin and Janet. And I also worked as a youth peer support specialist previously, and also a supervisor of other youth peers in a drop-in center and community-based youth peer program. So super excited to come and talk about youth peer support this morning.
Hi everyone, this is Janet Walker. I'm a research professor at Portland State University, director of Pathways Research and Training Center, and have a long-standing research interest in services for youth and young adults and for increasing the voice of service participants, including, of course, young people, in all levels of service provision and system development. And that is me and Jarvis on top of Mount Everest. And I do have other pets. They did not make that journey, but we have 4 chickens and a tortoise that was supposed to belong to my older son, but is probably going to live with me and my husband forever. So just a quick plug for this whole operation is a collaboration between Mhttc and Pathways Research and Training Center. You'll see that a lot of the materials and resources that we are going to be sharing are on the Pathways website. We're also going to have a page devoted to these consult meetings on the Research and Pathways RTC website. So there'll be lots of links leading you there, and certainly I encourage you to go ahead and explore other resources on the website if you are not familiar with our work. So just a teeny bit about logistics, and we obviously were having some technical difficulties at the start out of this. We've never quite run a meeting in exactly this configuration before. So in advance, please forgive us for any glitches that might happen. This is our current plan. Again, since this is the first meeting, it's unclear exactly how this is going to unfold over time, but the plan is to have these, and this part is quite certain that we are going to have these monthly virtual meetings on the 3rd Thursday at this time, 10 to 11 Pacific. We will be asking people to register each time. So once we decide the topic, we will send out an email to folks who have expressed this level of interest. And we will limit it to 30 participants or so that we can make it really an opportunity for people to ask questions. We'll be deciding exactly how we want to manage muting and unmuting people, whatever, but it's great to see. I think people have muted themselves as they come in. That's really nice etiquette and certainly helps, when your dog starts barking. So if you can't attend, we would really appreciate if you could give us 48 hours of notice so that we can open up some more spots on the call. We are going to record the calls. We're going to put them on the Pathways page. If you go to Pathways RTC, just put that in all one word into a search engine, you can get to Pathways easily. And there's a link from the front page, the homepage, to the page we're going to have for these calls. One thing we did want to talk about to start out with is confidentiality. We anticipate there'll be some discussion where people will be talking about scenarios and situations that come up in their own work. So we'd ask you, please, if you are doing so, to try not to include details that are identifying to the people involved. And if the fact of your asking the question will provide that level of, will sort of endanger the confidentiality, we encourage you to chat your question directly to us. And that way we can answer your question and you will not be personally identified. Therefore, the person that you're talking about or whatever may also their confidentiality can be maintained. And we plan to be also developing some mechanism for sharing your resources and stuff. We hope that this will be really interactive. So we'll probably be developing some kind of thing on Drive or Box or whatever, however we ultimately decide. If you have thoughts about that, feel free to put it in the chat.
I'd also like to make one more point about confidentiality. As somebody who was a youth peer, I know that sometimes you're going to have things to share that maybe you don't want your supervisor to find out about or things of that nature. If you don't feel like talking about it on the recording, you can always speak with Maria, Janet, or I individually. And if you feel like it's something that you want to get other feedback from, we can present it to the group in a way that keeps you anonymous.
Alrighty. Well, see, right now, I'm not getting my thing to advance the way one would normally think. And there we go. Okay. So we're going to launch another poll. Real quick, we just want to know a little bit more about the folks who are here. And Caitlin, can you launch that? I seem to have lost the polling capacity here, so.
Okay, so you should see the poll in front of you. It's asking you about what best describes your role. And if you're looking at this thinking, my role's not on here, feel free to put it in the chat.
And also, Caitlin, for some odd reason, I cannot see the poll on my screen at all. So if you just want to
yeah, kind of say what's happening,
what you're doing and show the results, that would be good.
Absolutely. So far we have a little over half of us have answered. It looks like that we have mostly youth and young adult peer support specialists. Other peer support specialists are here. We have managers and administrators in a program that include peer support. Other direct service providers. It looks like most of us have responded to the poll so far. We have about 84%. And then we have some people in the chat too. So it looks like we have a youth, drug, and alcohol school counselor. Welcome. A utilization review coordinator. Welcome. I'm really glad that you all are here. A student support advocate. Excellent. And so I think that that's probably most of us who have answered. So I'm going to end polling and then share the results. And I'm pleased to share, it looks like that most of us here, 38%, are youth and young adult peer support specialists. Welcome home. We always love chatting with you guys. We also have other peer support specialists. So as we know that, I would love some clarity on that if you feel like answering, maybe if you're a family support specialist or a recovery specialist, would love to learn a little bit more. We have people who are providing supervision to peer supports. Welcome, welcome. Managers and administrators, direct service providers. And as I mentioned before, folks who are doing their other roles. And it looks like a middle and high school prevention specialist and peer-to-peer group advisor. Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you for sharing, everybody. And I hope that you enjoyed the Office Space GIF. I thought it was very clever. So feel free to compliment me on all the funny things that you find in our webinars. I'm not vain at all. Sorry, continue, Janet.
Okay, so just to jump into a little bit of content, the way that we plan to structure these calls would be a little bit of content and then some time for discussion. And I think we're trying at this point also to figure out how much time the content will take. Obviously, this time there was a little bit more run up with all the background, et cetera. So hopefully in the future, we'll be able to jump into this stuff relatively quickly. So we wanted to start out with a discussion about role clarity because frankly, role clarity is sort of the foundation of effective peer work. Really, it's the foundation maybe of any job. Certainly the research would bear that out. But over the last, say, 20 years, peer support has grown enormously in the field as part of mental health service array. And of course, that means that there follows a lot of research that has been trying to answer questions about whether it works, what kind of impacts does it have. And even more recently, there have been efforts that take the various separate research projects to combine them to draw in a scientific way. What are the implications of all of that research when you take it as a whole? And it is very clear that the top conclusion that people draw is that there is generally a lack of role clarity in peer support generally, and including specifically with youth and young adult peer support. And we have put together a couple of summaries of this research so that if you really want to look at the citations and more into the details, we have the addresses there, and I believe we're going to try to put those in the chat as well. But they really get into what is this research and how does it describe some of the challenges and some of the approaches that could be used to addressing those challenges for peer support. So what is role clarity exactly? Role clarity exists when a person doing the role, as well as their supervisors, and really frankly, other people who are connected to the role, have a very clear and shared idea on at least three facets of a role. And first of all, that's sort of like, what are they supposed to be doing? And that would be the activities and responsibilities of the role. And this is obviously, it's necessary, but certainly not enough. A great job description, even a really long one, is only really the beginning of role clarity. So the second piece that needs to be in place is something that describes how they're supposed to carry out these activities and responsibilities. Are there specific processes that they're supposed to use, procedures, steps, etc.? And in peer support and human services generally, we hear a lot about practice principles. But usually these don't give a lot of information about the how. They don't say exactly or give a lot of guidance to a provider of what they're actually supposed to do in a very specific sense to make these principles happen in their practice. So that's one of the shortcomings that we often see identified relative to peer support. And then finally, in human service interventions, it's really also important for people to know why their activities are supposed to be done in a certain way. This gives them that level of understanding where they can start to build their own expertise versus being sort of instructed about what to do. So for example, with regard to peer support, it's really important for people who carry out the role to have a good idea about why their activities should lead to outcomes and which outcomes, in fact, their activities are supposed to promote. And particularly with regard to peer support, there should be a clear understanding about what is the unique contribution of having peers in these roles. And so what we know from research is that really most of the time, not all of these pieces are clarified for people. And this is particularly true for organizations that don't have much experience in hiring peers. And as you can see on the slide, lack of role clarity is related, and this is not just in peer roles, but generally across the board in employment, to job stress, turnover, burnout, et cetera. And additionally, a lack of role clarity can cause friction with coworkers, and this is something that we definitely see, particularly in youth peer support, because the coworkers don't understand what the youth peer support provider is supposed to be doing, and they often don't really understand what's the value. Why are we hiring this young person who doesn't have job experience? A lack of role clarity also makes it extremely difficult to provide good supervision. And this could be obvious, but it's difficult to tell people how to do their job better if there's not a super clear idea about what the job is supposed to be. And then, of course, thinking about roles in mental health and service provision, that it's pretty hard without that level of role clarity to have any kind of objectively defined standards of quality or fidelity expectations for a specific role. So that again makes it hard to get to that level of kind of optimal support for your employees or for yourself if you happen to be a peer support provider. So if you reverse all of this, then having role clarity gets you a long way. It helps to decrease job stress, burnout, and turnover, lead to better supervision, and potentially to that highest level of what we would hope to see, again, for employee support, which is sort of an ongoing skill building, quality assurance, and fidelity process. So that is why we wanted to make sure that we were starting with some role clarity topics. And so I guess what we were planning at this point was just to hear a little bit about how you see the primary role responsibilities of your youth peer support specialists. And I guess if you happen to be one of those, do you have a clear idea about what those are supposed to be? And I think, I'm not sure how we're going to hear from people. Caitlin, do we have Do we have that figured out?
Yeah, so if folks could please either type into the chat or use the hand raise function on Zoom. Sorry, I'm struggling with a cat right now since we introduced them. Then please raise your hand. We can go ahead and call on you, unmute yourself, and please share your perspective. So if you don't know where the hand raise function is on Zoom, you just click on the reactions symbol at the bottom of your screen, and I'll share a little yay party hat with you. So you can go ahead. I mean, you can share the party hat, maybe not the crying emoji, that would make me sad, but whatever you'd like.
Do we know if people are muted from our end or from their end, Caitlin?
Folks that have the ability to unmute themselves or to be asked to unmute, yeah. So it looks like Tim shared with us to provide strengths-based, client-centered, trauma-informed services that meet the client where they are and help them define their value system and support them as they live their lives through said values. I love that, Tim. I especially love that you brought up values because I think it's really important that we're working with youth to find out what motivates them, to work with them on that, right? So that's a great response.
So I'm wondering if we can let people continue to add their stuff to the discussion and we can move ahead and just encourage people. We'll stop periodically, and I don't think it matters whether we're answering questions from this slide or previous slide or whatever. So just to kind of keep things moving along, unless you see other questions at this point, Caitlin.
Well, I see that Chris shared that they're a wraparound program supervisor, and something that I think is great that they shared is some of the main responsibilities are to meet with youth before meetings so that they understand the agenda and that their voice is heard and understood. That's something that I highly recommend. I tell all the peers that I've worked with, like, preparation before a meeting is what's going to make a good meeting, and make sure that the youth knows what they want to say. We actually do some training on that in our Achieve My Plan curriculum. So it looks like we've got some good answers here, and we have other opportunity for discussion. And if anybody has anything that they want to share, even while we're talking, they can go ahead and throw it in the chat or raise their hand, and we'll make sure that you get called on.
All right, so I think somebody else is taking over now.
So we're going to talk a little bit about providing role clarity. So we know the importance of that, right? But you want to make sure that your agency has a really clear definition of what youth peer supports do and don't do. I think that oftentimes we can be really good about saying, well, youth peers are youth driven. Youth peers bring voice to the table. And then the youth peers kind of like, how the heck do I do that, right? I know that when I started as a youth peer, I was a little unclear about what my role was supposed to be. That was back in 2014. So obviously we've had some changes since then, but we do still find in some of our coaching and teaching that youth peers are often asked to do things that really aren't in their role and can kind of deteriorate some of the rapport or mutuality that they've built up with their clients. So that can include things like putting youth peers on a pedestal and making sure that they're the perfect role model. In the words of Rihanna, I ain't no role model. That they're babysitters or like are expected to look after the youth, or that they're going to tell on the youth and report back to their parents or their providers about things that the youth is telling them. Next slide, please. So some ways that we recommend you can provide role clarity is just having a really clear job description at the start that not only defines the role of a youth peer, but outlines the qualifications and tasks. So number one qualification we all know is lived experience, right? But people often don't really know what that term means unless we're already in the field. So you really want to make sure that that's outlined and specify what kind of lived experience is required. So for example, if you're working with young people in mental health and substance abuse, you want to say your lived experience should include involvement with mental health and or substance abuse treatment. We want to make sure that we're trying to find peers who can relate to the youth that we're serving, right? And then you also want to make sure that you're providing ongoing training and coaching on how youth peer support specialists should be engaging with youth clients. This is super important because we know that this role can sometimes feel a little murky to people who don't understand it. So youth peers really need to know, what do they do in order to build the mutuality and respect with their youth, bring their voice to the table, but not creep in the role of like friendship or therapist or parent, right? How do they really maintain those boundaries in order to best serve their young people? So we're curious to know, what are some of the specific ways that youth peer support in your agency support their young people? I think we already got some great examples in our last discussion, but if anybody else has anything that they want to share, we encourage you to do so. Youth peers on the call, is there anything that you would do specifically to help like maintain the boundaries of your role while supporting your clients? Well, I guess then I'm interested to hear from, I know Maria obviously has lots of experience on this. Maria, you want to share some of the things that you would either encourage your staff to do or that you would do in supporting youth peers or supporting youth? My apologies.
Sure. Related to like setting boundaries. Is that
Or just anything. Yeah.
Oh, it looks like Raylan is raising their hand. You want to call on them?
Sure. Yeah. Raylan, go ahead.
Great. Can you hear me all right?
Sure can.
Yeah.
Okay. I think when it comes to boundaries, something that this helped me more recently is trying to clearly define upfront as a client, or in my case, as students are being introduced to me, and I'm determining whether to take them onto my caseload or not. At the first initial 1, 2, or 3 meeting with them, kind of defining ways that I can support them very clearly from the get-go. And I think that I'm doing that a lot more this year, and I'm seeing that that's helping me support students in a healthy way versus what you just kind of referred to as I'm coming in as maybe just another friend, or they're not really sure. So when I clearly define it from the get-go, I think that's helped me in my client relations.
That's huge. Yeah, because you want to really make sure that you're preparing them for success. And so telling them from the beginning, like, these are some of the things that I can help with, and also really clarifying some of the things like, hey, I'm a mandatory reporter. This is what that means. These are the contexts that we'll be working with each other in, so that there are no surprises, right? And they really understand the nature of the relationship. Yeah, that's an excellent point. We see from Candace in the chat that youth peers are there to like really help youth working within the systems. Yeah, system navigation is a big one. And really just knowing that you have somebody there who's kind of done that before and gets it and gets some of the less fun aspects of it that you can talk to. Yeah, and then it looks like yeah, we have a lot in the chat. So a space where youth can share their struggles without judgment or any fear of backlash. For sure. I think that that's really important, that youth have somebody that they can share with, where they know that maybe their circumstances will be normalized and they're not going to be lectured or shamed or whatever for what it is that they're doing. And then I love that Chris says, we encourage our peers to lay out their role in the beginning, help the youth understand that they're not a forever support. That's a big one. I know that I've screwed that one up actually, where I haven't really like defined that in the beginning with my youth. And then they're like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Like, where are you going? So that's a big one. Great responses, you all. So one thing that we really try to support is training and coaching for youth peers. So youth peer support specialists should have ongoing training and coaching in order to understand how to do their job effectively. This is something that, again, I think oftentimes we'll provide training and coaching and talk about these great philosophies, but then are a little confused on how to actually make that happen. So a lot of trainings provide information on what the role is, but not really how to effectively enact it. You want to make sure that coaching and supervision really focuses on specific youth-driven techniques and professional development. So things like making sure that youth peers are really using maybe some motivational interviewing techniques, really to draw out the young person's voice, making sure that they're not there to instruct the youth on what to do, making sure that strategic sharing is something that's really beneficial for the youth and safe for the peer. And what we've noticed just in some of our research, this is really hard to achieve without actually observing practice, right? So in some of the interventions and models that we use to support youth peers, they submit videos to us that we get to watch, and Maria and I, having been youth peers, say, this is where you're doing really well, or these are some areas for growth. But we're curious to know, is there any kind of ongoing training and coaching that your agency provides? And what does that look like? Are there any like trainings or coachings that you've done that you highly recommend to folks? So it looks like there's monthly supervision for 1 hour from Tim, and John has raised their hand. John, what do you guys do?
Yeah, one of the things that we do in our organization, we have about 20 peer staff members right now across different teams.
Mm-hmm.
And my role, one of the aspects of my role is to provide peer support to them on the job. So I'm available to meet with them throughout the week, just to kind of check in, see how they're doing with their own wellness and recovery, if there's any questions they have about, their role and how I can be a support to them. And so, yeah, using many of the things people have kind of tossed out and we've talked about, helping them kind of like focus on what is their role in that relationship, that supportive relationship, that it's not, it's a therapeutic kind of relationship, but it's really peer. And I like what people shared about setting expectations up front. And one of the things that I encourage is for peers to be a little careful with sharing some personal aspects of their life beyond kind of what is relevant to that person's wellness and recovery. Because it can kind of build that sense of friendship that's more difficult to end when that time of working together might come to an end. But yeah, so we've implemented staff peer support, which includes RAP as well. And we encourage all of our peer staff to have a RAP that they're actively using.
I love that. Yeah, I know that was super important at the agency that I worked for, was because it was a peer-based agency. Basically, the peers could be peers to each other too. Right. That's actually how Maria and I met, like high five, throwing it out there. And we would constantly as supervisors be like, okay, yep, like what's your wellness plan? We're talking about this. What are you doing for self-care this week? So I think that's great. It looks like Kennedy shared that during COVID, their supervisor is sending out free trainings to join, which is really cool. Or ask what trainings that she want and find some for the agency that they can pay for. I think that's super valuable that your supervisor is coming to you saying like, what do you need and how can we support that? That's awesome. Okay, I think that we can move on to the next slide for the sake of time. Really great discussion points, you guys. All right, and I'm going to throw it to Maria to talk about, all right, what do youth peer supports actually do?
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so we like to break it down in terms of, what do youth peer supports actually do and not do, right? Because there can be a lot of misconceptions around this role as, we all define this and continue to define this role that's still emerging. So we have a handy dandy document called What Do Youth Peer Support Specialists Do and Not Do that we pulled a few of these things from. So the first one that we identified is building hope, which can be kind of a complicated thing, right? But that's one of the main responsibilities that youth peers have, right? They use their lived experience to show young people that, there is a future just by their existence as a person in recovery or, having been through that hard time that is somehow relatable to the young person. They show the young person that like, oh, there's a future beyond whatever it is that you're going through now. But, it goes along with this strategic sharing piece where it's a bit complicated, right? You want to be a role model where you're doing with the young person without doing for the young person, right? And also, like Caitlin said, it's a hard expectation to put on a young person to be like the perfect model of recovery. So we like to, put as a caveat with the building hope piece that it's important to be like realistic and, it's good to talk about like the hard parts of recovery as well as like, being like that perfect beacon of hope that can be counterproductive. And then the second piece, of course, is strategic sharing. I love that. I think John just talked about, encouraging his youth peers not to share everything up front. And that's a big part of strategic sharing, right? What parts of your story are you sharing with a young person? What parts are they ready to hear? What parts will be beneficial to them? And then how are you sharing your story in a way that is going to be safe for you as a youth peer? And that's something that we encourage supervisors to work with their youth peer staff ahead of time to, identify how are they going to share their own story in a way that's not re-traumatizing to them or triggering to them. And, if they do experience some of that, what's like a safety and self-care plan that they can access afterwards. Next slide. Oh, okay. So good question and good gift, Caitlin. So what are some ways youth peer supports can build hope and do that strategic sharing without the pressure of being labeled a role model?
It's a hard one.
You want to start us out?
Well, I actually think that in a lot of situations, youth peers are going to be labeled somewhat of a role model, not always necessarily by their young people, but sometimes by the other professionals that they're working with. And that can sort of be framed in that way. And so I think when we're working with our young people, it's really important to say, like, I am here to help you learn what it can look like to be in recovery or to be outside of these systems now. But recovery isn't anything where I'm like fixed or perfect. I still have days where I struggle. It just might look different than it did when I was younger. So, and oftentimes I think that that's something that's really helpful for youth peers to try and like practice framing for professionals too.
Yeah.
Ooh, Tim just said something really cool. He said, role models are allowed to fail. What's important is how they recover from that failure.
Yeah.
I think that's super important. Snaps for Tim. Like, sorry,
and
my cat's
James
on my lap.
shared, listen first to gather what information in order to learn how best to use your story. Yeah, I think that's really important, in order to strategically share your story in a way that's actually going to benefit the young person, right? And not, overpower, the conversation and make it more about you, which can be easy to do. Anyone else? Oh yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that I remind the peer staff that I coach, and in doing so, it reminds me too, with the folks that I work with, is that we're not trying to portray this idea or this image that, I like what you said, Caitlin, about recovery. It's not really like you get there and you're there. It's like it's a process, right? And so what I encourage staff, how I encourage them to look at their role and to see themselves as, hey, it's not like I'm here and I'm going to help you get here where I am by sharing with you. It's like, I'm going to come alongside you and maybe we can learn together, and I can share what's helped me. It may or may not work for you or help you. But again, it's that idea of identifying what would inspire hope, and a belief for a better future and a better outcome for that individual. So I think really coming alongside is what I try to encourage, to not kind of build that sense of like, I'm like this perfect example of recovery, right? Which doesn't exist. So
Yeah.
I think that really that partnership is important.
Yeah, absolutely. That mutuality. And I love the phrase of like walking alongside. I would always use that when I explained what youth peer support was to other people. And, sometimes just sharing the bad stuff and the hard stuff is what's really going to help you connect to a young person the most, right?
Yep.
Okay, we have some more responses in the chat. I just point to the fact that my own experience as a youth was a messy one at times, but I did end up where I am today to be able to use my experiences to support them through their own. There's such an underrated power to vulnerability. Being human isn't easy, but you're not alone in this experience. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just being able to connect on that hard stuff that you're going through. I mean, that's what makes the youth peer relationship like so special and unique, right? Because youth aren't necessarily going to be hearing that from other providers. And Chris said, I think you can point back to the youth's strengths and their strategies, so they're almost looking at themselves instead of relying on you as the model. Yeah, I love that. Snaps from Caitlin. Great responses, everyone. Difficult question, great responses. I guess we can go to the next slide. Feel free to throw out some more thoughts if anything comes. Some more things that youth peer support specialists do. I'll buzz through these so we can get to the fun stuff that they don't do. Affirmation. So they are affirming what the young person identifies as their own goals, their own strengths, their own ideas. We're not here to shut down the young person and say that's not realistic or that's not what your parents want you to do, that kind of thing. We're here to affirm the young person's perspective and support them. Relationship building. The youth peer support specialist is there to build that relationship with the young person and build that trust with the young person. And by building that healthy relationship with the young person, they're going to model how to build healthy relationships with others. Yes, we do have a printable version of these slides, and I think I can send out a link to it in a moment. And if there's a follow-up or if we end up having like a drive, we'll definitely throw it on there for y'all as well. It's also on the Pathways website. If you Google like Pathways Portland State, you should be able to find it, but I'll throw it in the chat. And then the last one we threw up here is destigmatization, which is a big part of youth peer support. Young people who are in youth peer support are often involved in systems, and they might have negative self-image related to their involvement in systems or their own, mental health challenges. Oh, thanks, Caitlin. That's the Pathways website. If you go to our featured pubs tab on there, this publication is on there. But related to destigmatization, that's one of the big things that youth peers can really uniquely do in their position, and destigmatize that systems experience by saying, I've been there too. You know, I get that. They can also do that with other team members and providers as well, as by being advocates, sometimes, you know, in different committees and councils, but even just in like team planning processes like wraparound. Next slide. So how can you support youth peer support specialists in maintaining a clear role with their youth? Well, most of us are youth peer support specialists, it sounds like. So I guess this is more a question for the supervisors. Or how do you as youth peer support specialists maintain some of those boundaries we touched on, like between not being a friend or, you know, not being a therapist, or maybe even, you know, not doing things for the young person, that kind of thing.
I think we also got some really good answers to this in our previous discussion. Like,
that's true.
I remember what Raylan said about like being really clear from the beginning, you know. John shared about like really deciding what are the important pieces of your story that you want to share. So if anybody else has any thoughts, we really want to hear it. But we do also have other stuff to review, and we're almost done.
Yeah, that's true. We're running out of time. Okay. So, oh, go ahead.
No, go for it, Maria.
Okay, I got this. So, along with the things that youth peers do, there are several things that they don't do. And, you know, as a youth peer, I found myself having to clarify a lot of these. I'm guessing some of you might have to as well. Because like I said, there are still a lot of misconceptions around the youth peer role. And a lot of times, you know, we find ourselves having to distinguish it from other roles, like a caseworker or a therapist or a skills trainer, you know, things like that, a mentor. So what youth peers don't do, be their friend. A lot of you touched on that. You might have to explain this to a young person. You might have to explain this to their parent. You know, I'm not just here to hang out with them, you know, I'm actually another provider. We're working on stuff, but this is a great thing to clarify up front, like Raylan touched on, you know, so you can set those expectations with the young person and really let them know, you know, yes, I'm a friendly person and we're probably going to have fun together, but like I am a mandatory reporter and these are like, you know, certain ethical expectations that you should know ahead of time. Also, youth peers are not there to be a therapist. You know, they are hired for their lived experience, not their clinical background, and they shouldn't be making clinical decisions for the young person. They might be being a bridge to those clinical supports or more traditional supports, if that's what the young person identifies that they need or want. But they should really be working with them to identify what their own goals and strategies are, not, you know, coming from a clinical or therapeutic lens on that, right? So, and we also know that a lot of youth peers are coming to youth peer support, at least I found in the drop-in center I worked on, you know, specifically because it's not therapy and it's something different, right? So we always caution our trainings, like, you know, try to stay away from some of that therapizing sounding language. And then youth peers also are not superheroes. They can wear a cape if they want. But, you know, they will be working a lot with young people experiencing crisis. But a lot of times the expectation is on the youth peer to come in and save the day. Or, oh, now we got a youth partner on our wraparound team and all of our problems are going to be solved, right? You know, but that's a lot of expectation to put on the youth peer. And, you know, it's going to be pretty hard on a youth peer who's managing their own recovery and their own needs and, you know, their own work-life balance to always be that person answering the call when crisis hits. So that needs to be an expectation that's managed with the team as well as with the young person. Next slide. All right, so before we wrap up, what are some other things youth peer support specialists are expected to do that are not within their role? The things that maybe you've been asked to do.
I'll throw one out there that I know both you and I have experienced, Maria, and maybe we can get a little raise of hands, but has anybody thought that, they were a chauffeur? Yeah. And then Chris just said, team members that expect me to be a spy or a reporter back to the team. Oh, totally. I mean, I can't even say how many times I was like, I can't share that. Maybe that's a discussion that you want to have with the young person, not my job. Yeah. Ally with the youth and report back to the parents. Totally.
Lecture youth about specific behaviors. Yep, that's a big one. Hey, can you tell them to
not do this?
Not do this?
Yeah. Can you just tell them be better?
So yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you all are not alone in having these expectations. I think we've all both experienced these as well as heard these so many times. What does it mean if I can't offer peer support without a car? Well, I think a big part of peer support is, giving rides, but we just want to maintain the expectation that we're not going to be driving youth everywhere, or the only resource for them to get rides, right?
And I think it's actually really valuable for youth to learn, no, I can come to you to meet up and do our activity or whatever it is, so yeah. You can still offer peer support without a car, but sometimes the car is helpful.
Yep. Yeah, I was notorious for being a sucker for giving rides, but I had to set some good boundaries around that, and it helped the young people build some good self-determination skills around, learning the bus routes in the area too. The supervisor who jokingly suggested I wear a taxi driver hat. Yep. Family wanting you to make their child do what they want. Yep, that's a big one as well.
For sure. And I think related to that, youth peer supports are not also family peer supports. We're there to provide peer support to the youth, not the parent. And sometimes that boundary can get real murky.
So I think we're at 11, so we should wrap things up, which is great that we've got so much discussion today and we ran out of time a little bit. Mm-hmm. Just reminding everyone to fill out the evaluation. Caitlin just shared the link again. And then I believe for future sessions, I don't know, one of you can go over the logistics because I'm not super clear on it.
So for future sessions, what will happen is you will be asked to register for each session. We're hoping that we can get a group of regular participants to attend because that way we can all learn from each other, learn more about our own expertise, things of that nature. But you will receive an email for anybody who attended this webinar about registering for our next consult call, which again will be every third Thursday of the month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific time.
And in the spirit of experimenting about what might work better, first of all, if you have any thoughts on topics or structure or anything, just stick them in the chat right now or feel free to email us. The other thing is when we send out the email about the next one, it'll have the topic. And we would invite you to send in back to us any scenarios that you might want to discuss. And if you have a scenario or something that's actually going on in your work or a particularly sticky or interesting situation, we'd encourage you, just regardless of the topic, to send that into, because we're we're again debating with the idea of perhaps having some kind of open discussion of different, regardless of what the topic. So a little bit of topic and a little bit of open. So yeah, some sort of scenario-based stuff based on things that you all would send in to us. So when you think about registering, think if there's something that you would like to send in for that too, and we'll remind you in the email or in a follow-up, however it works.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today and for sharing so much great expertise. Oh, where on the website are the resources from today?
So that's a great question, Raylan. And I'm going to go ahead and just explain it real quick since it's kind of complicated to put in the chat. So you'll go to the website, you'll go to the products tab, it'll go down and say featured products. And that's where you're going to click and not only find everything that we reviewed today, but a lot of other really cool stuff too, related to youth, peers, and youth and young adult mental health. So, but we can also follow up with the specific things we reviewed today in an email.
Yeah.
And please do, I know it's boring to do these evaluations all the time. I have to say that I personally have started skipping them on a pretty regular basis, but we would really appreciate if you could do the evaluation. I think it's pretty short because it helps our group. Oh, there we go. Anyway, hopefully it will be easy. So thanks for joining us, everyone, and thanks for sticking with us. And we look forward to continuing this series.
Yep. See you all next month.
Absolutely. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.